It was just before sunrise in Guthrie, Oklahoma, a calm Thursday morning like any other, the kind of morning where kids get ready for school and parents sip coffee in quiet kitchens. But inside one house on West Orbit Drive, something had gone terribly wrong. By 7 a.m., a teenage girl would make a chilling 911 call. Police would rush to the scene, and what they found inside that bedroom would leave even the most seasoned officers stunned. A father, dead. A home, untouched. And a mystery just beginning to unfold. Who would do this? Why was only one thing missing? And how could something so violent happen, with someone else still in the house? This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't random. And the answers, when they came, would shock everyone. It was the morning of Thursday, May 13th, 2010, in the small city of Guthrie, Oklahoma. The sun had just begun to rise over the tree-lined streets. It looked like any other normal weekday. Families were preparing for work, kids getting ready for school, and the neighborhood was beginning to stir. But at 7:52 a.m., a single phone call would shatter the stillness. The call came from 402 West Orbit Drive. On the line was 15-year-old Khalif Fryer. Her voice was shaky and panicked. Words tumbled out in confusion, some barely coherent. But one thing was clear: something terrible had happened inside the house. Khalif had just found her father, 50-year-old Louis Fryer, dead in his bedroom. What she walked in on was something no child should ever see. When officers arrived at the scene, they entered what looked like the aftermath of a violent home invasion. Furniture was overturned, drawers pulled out, and Louis's car was missing from the driveway. Inside the bedroom, the scene was nothing short of horrific. Blood was everywhere, on the bed, the walls, the floors, the door. It was clear that Louis had fought hard for his life. He had multiple stab wounds to the neck and back. His arms and hands showed defensive injuries, deep cuts from trying to shield himself. The attack had been brutal, personal. And the weapon? A kitchen knife from his own home. The same one that now was missing from the knife rack. It appeared that Louis had been asleep when he was first struck. The blankets were still tangled around his legs, as if he had been yanked from sleep mid-attack. Blood pooled on the mattress suggested the violence started while he was lying down, defenseless. He never had a chance to react, not until the fight for survival had already begun. Louis was a hard-working, well-liked man. He worked as a designer at a picture-framing company and raised his two children, Callie and her older brother Keith, now 18. 13 years earlier, he had taken full custody after splitting from his wife, Tricia, in 1997. Tricia had been struggling with drug addiction and spent time in and out of prison. But Louis never spoke badly of her. In fact, he encouraged his kids to maintain contact with their mother, even when the court said less would be okay. To his son and daughter, he was their rock, their protector, their constant. Friends described him as laid back, loyal, and someone who could always make people laugh. He loved fishing, loved sports, and most of all, he loved his kids. As police processed the scene, Callie was placed in the back of a patrol car. Shaken and stunned, she answered every question detectives asked. She couldn't think of a single person who would want to hurt her father. "Everybody likes my dad," she told them. Callie explained that the night before had been perfectly normal. They had dinner together and watched a movie. Around 10:30 p.m., they both went to bed. She hadn't heard a thing all night. Her dad usually woke her up for school, but that morning, the house was silent. No sound of him making breakfast, no TV, no footsteps. She went looking for him, and that's when she found the bedroom door open, and the horror inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass. Investigators quickly ruled out a break-in. The front door may have been left unlocked. There was a small smear of blood on the back door, likely from whoever had escaped that way. It seemed the killer knew the layout, knew the house, maybe even knew when everyone would be asleep. As in all murder investigations, detectives looked first at those closest to the victim. And in this case, that meant Lewis's ex-wife Tricia. Was there a custody dispute? Had something changed? At first, she was hard to reach. But when she finally spoke to police, she came in willingly. She was cooperative, calm, emotional, but not evasive. And it didn't take long to rule her out. Tricia admitted that Lewis was a better parent for the kids at that time in her life. She was thankful for the stability he gave them. There was no bad blood, no resentment, no motive. Investigators would have to look elsewhere. As investigators dug deeper, a new detail came to light, one that could shift the focus of the case. Callie told detectives something important. Just a few days before the murder, her older brother, 18-year-old Keith, had packed up and left the house. There had been a fight, one that started at school and ended at home. Keith had gotten into a physical altercation with another student. When their father, Lewis, found out, he was deeply disappointed. He had always made it clear, once they turned 18, they were adults, and that meant taking responsibility. Getting into a fight wasn't something he would tolerate anymore. He told Keith it was time to leave. Keith had gone to stay with a friend, but everyone around them knew it wasn't permanent. Lewis had made it clear he still loved his son. He just needed him to own up to his actions. If Keith was willing to take responsibility and avoid trouble, he'd be welcomed back with open arms. Still, detectives had to consider the possibility. Could this tension have led to something darker? Detectives headed to the school and quietly pulled Keith out of class. Inside the principal's office, they broke the news. His dad was gone. Keith's reaction was instant and raw. He didn't believe it. He started yelling that it wasn't true. Within moments, he flew into a rage, throwing a chair against the wall, breaking down in tears. His grief was overwhelming. He was devastated, especially knowing the last time they'd spoken, they'd left things on bad terms. But investigators quickly ruled him out. Multiple friends confirmed he'd been with them all night. He hadn't been anywhere near the house in days. Attention then turned to Lewis's missing vehicle. An alert was sent out. The clock was ticking. 8 hours had already passed since it disappeared. The trail was going cold. Police canvassed nearby neighborhoods, hoping someone had seen something. They spoke to friends, neighbors, co-workers, anyone who knew the Fryer family. The same answer came up again and again. Lewis didn't have enemies. He didn't fight with people. He was well liked at work and in the community. No known grudges, no red flags, which only made things more confusing. The scene at the house didn't scream robbery. Nothing had been stolen. No electronics, no valuables, not even cash. The only thing missing was the car. And even that, detectives suspected, was just a means to escape, not the motive. That's when two of Callie's friends came forward. They had something to say, and it would change everything. They told detectives that Callie hadn't exactly been the quiet, polite girl most people thought she was. In recent years, she had started spiraling, drinking heavily, experimenting with drugs, hosting wild parties at the house when her dad wasn't around. She was constantly in trouble. She had been expelled more than once and hadn't been to school for months. Lewis had tried to set boundaries. He was tightening curfews, laying down rules, trying to regain some control. But Callie wasn't having it. Their relationship had grown toxic. When police searched her bedroom, they found her diary. What it contained sent a chill down their spines. Entry after entry showed her anger toward her father, her resentment, the hate that had built up. One line in particular stood out: "You're dead to me." She had convinced herself that living with her mother would mean freedom. No rules, no discipline, just a blank check to do whatever she wanted. But her dad wasn't going to let that happen. And yet, for all the tension between them, there was one thing that continued to bother investigators. How had Calais slept through it all? The murder had been loud. There had been a fight. Objects knocked over. Blood everywhere. Her father, likely shouting in pain. And then, someone stealing the car and driving off. And still, she heard nothing? It didn't add up. Her brother Keith said he couldn't shake the feeling either. Something didn't sit right with him. He remembered the moment he saw Callie again, when she and their mother picked him up from school after their dad's death. He looked at her face and just knew she was lying. Growing up, the two had been close, partners in crime, sneaking out together. But in recent years, things changed. Callie had gone down a dark path: the drugs, the drinking, the defiance. He had tried to talk to her about it, but she wouldn't listen. He told police she'd always struggled with her mental health, that she didn't like being told what to do, and that she had a mean streak. When she was angry, she could flip in an instant. There had been trouble between father and daughter for a while, and while detectives still weren't sure she had physically committed the murder herself, one thing was becoming more and more clear: Callie likely knew who did. Then, the investigators discovered that Callie had been secretly dating a 21-year-old man named Jerome Charles Jr., known simply as Jay. He wasn't just a few years older. He was a grown adult with no stable address, no job, and no steady income. Yet somehow, he had become a regular presence in Callie's world. Jay didn't live anywhere consistently. So, to keep the relationship going, Callie had begun sneaking him into her home during the night while Lewis slept just rooms away. Some sources even suggested Jay may have been married at the time, though details of that remain murky. But secrets like that don't stay hidden forever. Eventually, Lewis found out. And when he did, he wasted no time confronting Callie. He made his position clear: this relationship was unacceptable. Jay was never to step foot in his home again. The age gap alone, between a 21-year-old and his 15-year-old daughter, was not only inappropriate, it was illegal under Oklahoma state law. But Lewis didn't stop there. The very next day, he found Jay wandering around the neighborhood and confronted him face to face. There was no mistaking Lewis's message. Jay wasn't welcome, and the relationship had to end. Period. Now, for the investigators, that confrontation raised a dangerous possibility. With the threat of legal consequences looming, and Lewis standing firmly in the way of their relationship, they now had a potential motive. But finding Jay would be another matter entirely. While the search for Jay continued, police finally caught a break. The missing car, the one stolen from Lewis's driveway, was found abandoned in Oklahoma City. It had visible damage. The keys were still inside. But no murder weapon, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing else of value at the scene. Still, it was the first real lead they had in hours. And not long after, Jay himself was located in Oklahoma City. He had apparently called a friend asking for a ride home, said he was stranded and didn't know how to get back. That friend, thinking fast, convinced him to stay put and told him to wait for police. Thankfully, he agreed. Jay didn't resist arrest. In fact, he volunteered to speak with detectives. At first, he denied everything. He had no idea what had happened, he said. He hadn't been there. But that story fell apart quickly. Eventually, Jay admitted he had been at the Fryer house that night. Callie had let him in after everyone had gone to bed. But what he said next left investigators suspicious. He claimed that Lewis had woken up in the middle of the night and found them together. According to Jay, Lewis flew into a rage and tried to hit him with a golf club. Fearing for his life, Jay said he ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and acted in self-defense. But that version of events didn't hold up. Detectives already knew the layout of the house, and the blood evidence told a very different story. Lewis had been attacked in his bed, not in the hallway. His feet had been found near the closet, where his golf clubs were stored. None of those clubs had been moved. They were dusty and untouched. There was no blood trail in the hallway. All the violence had taken place in the bedroom. That meant Jay's version, a sudden hallway ambush, was a lie. When pressed again, Jay changed his story. This time, he claimed he had broken into the house to rob Lewis. But when Lewis woke up, Jay panicked and stabbed him. That story didn't make sense either. Nothing had been stolen. No wallet, no valuables, no electronics. Only the car had been taken, and even that had been abandoned without effort to sell or hide it. So detectives pushed harder, and finally, Jay broke. He admitted the truth, or at least a version of it. Jay said that Callie had been asking him to kill her father for a while. She had begged, she had pleaded, she wanted Lewis gone. And that night, the plan had been set. Jay claimed that Callie told him exactly how to do it, what time to come, which door would be unlocked, where to find the knife, and when to strike. She even promised him that once Lewis was out of the way, they would be free to start a new life, together. And then came the detail that twisted the entire motive even further. Calais had told Jay she was pregnant. That revelation pushed Jay over the edge. That night, after Calais and her father had gone to sleep, she quietly slipped out of her room and unlocked the door. The rest was a plan already in motion. Jay entered the house through the back door, just as Callie had arranged. The knife was exactly where she had told him it would be, in the kitchen. He crept down the hallway and into the bedroom where Lewis lay asleep. Jay said he paused, just for a second. But when Lewis began to stir, that hesitation disappeared. He lunged forward and began stabbing. The attack was frenzied and brutal. By the time it was over, Lewis was dead. Jay grabbed the car keys, fled the house, and drove toward Oklahoma City. Somewhere along the route, he tossed the murder weapon out the window. He would later claim Callie had promised to meet him once he got there, but she never showed. Instead, he wandered through Oklahoma City alone, eventually calling Callie just before 7 a.m. to let her know where he was. Moments later, Kaylee dialed 911, beginning what she thought was the perfect cover: a fake discovery, a panicked daughter, a flawless alibi. But within 24 hours, the whole thing collapsed. Jay was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Shortly after, detectives arrived at Tricia Wheeler's home, where Callie had been staying. She too was taken into custody and later charged with the same. As investigators combed through phone records, a timeline emerged. Kaylee had phoned Jay just minutes before her 911 call. Her phone also showed that she had been online around 3 a.m., the time Jay later said the murder occurred. She had claimed to be asleep the whole night. The digital evidence painted a different picture. There were numerous calls and messages exchanged between them that night. The times matched Jay's story with precision. Despite this, Callie denied everything. She immediately requested a lawyer and entered a plea of not guilty. The media swarmed the courthouse. The image of a 15-year-old girl accused of orchestrating her father's murder shocked the community and the nation. While in custody, Callie's calls were monitored closely, and it was during one of those calls that a disturbing truth came to light. Callie had never been pregnant. She had lied about it to manipulate Jay, to push him toward murder, to make him believe they had a future, to trap him in her plan. When detectives told Jay the pregnancy had been fabricated, they said he appeared genuinely shaken. It was the breaking point. Jay agreed to testify against Callie in exchange for a plea deal. The case moved forward. Prosecutors now had their narrative. A manipulative teenager who convinced her older boyfriend to carry out the unthinkable. Callie's mother, Tricia, stood by her daughter. She told reporters that Callie was innocent, that she knew her daughter well enough to tell when she was lying. She believed this was all Jay's doing. But Jay, now standing in court, told the judge that Callie had left the door unlocked, told him where to find the knife, and planned everything in advance. Callie's defense argued that there was no forensic evidence linking her to the murder, no fingerprints, no blood, no DNA, just Jay's word, and a web of texts and calls. But for the judge, that was enough to move forward. Callie would be tried as an adult. Jay pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in July 2010. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In May 2011, Callie Fryer, now 16 years old, stood trial. She still maintained her innocence, but the jury didn't believe her. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In Oklahoma, a life sentence with parole means 45 years. Callie won't be eligible until she's 61 years old. Jay won't see a parole board until the year 2077. By then, he'll be nearly 90. As her sentence was read, Callie didn't look toward her family in the courtroom. Once a blonde teenager, now her appearance had changed. She showed little emotion until the end. Only then did a few quiet tears fall. Her attorney expressed concern that a 15-year-old girl would spend her life in prison among adults decades older. Callie's family refused to speak publicly. They said only this: for the first time since Lewis's murder, they could finally feel safe, at least for a while. Some friends and family were relieved. They said Callie had a dark side, and now she couldn't hurt anyone else. But others felt her sentence was excessive. They believed Jay, the adult in the situation, should have received more blame. Tricia, Callie's mother, continued to insist her daughter had been wrongly accused. Keith, Callie's older brother, struggled to make sense of everything. He went to therapy. He started drinking. He questioned everything. She was just 15. Did she really understand what she'd done? Was she caught up in a fantasy? Did she even believe it would happen? But what haunted him most was the fact that she hadn't stopped it. That she lay awake in that house, knowing what was coming, and let it happen anyway. That kind of coldness, he said, was hard to understand. And yet, despite it all, he still answered her calls. He hadn't visited. But he picked up the phone when she called from prison, because that's what their dad would have wanted. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.